when you the kind of tactics when you are selling religion to a bunch of people in the south, because there's no unifying voice, there's no religion that's upended culture. Because what the British would have done was they are trying to come and change a religion that had existed for 400, 500 years before you came in a place, and there's already a history of jihad, crusades, and jihads. So the smart thing to do is not to come and say you must force them. Yes, the British defeated the Emirates, but the British also understood very well that this religion, Islam, is sort of part of the Abrahamic religion, part of that branch of religion they want to come and sell to them, and that you don't want to create another problem. Thinking of the history of wars, and so you're like, is it worth it? And the answer was no. Would you think the British would have loved to lose more men to sell this religion? Knowing fully well that again that the indirect, the way the system in the north they met favored them. The indirect system of the emirs favored them and said, like, we can accommodate these guys, we can leave them in a religion as far as they are loyal to us. Again, the standing of Islam as a religion was far more higher than the standing of whatever gods we had in the southeast. Because the British knew what Islam was and knew the kind of wars they had fought in the name of Christianity and Islam. They didn't know North Africa. And so you didn't want that. So what you wanted was, we just want power. You can keep your religion. And so they had to be a bit more careful and tactful in the way they handled the religious situation in the north versus the way they handled the religious situation in the south, especially in the southeast, where they didn't give a fuck about your religion. I mean, your religion had not commanded anybody, had not killed anybody, so they didn't care. You know, I think that's to me, this is the basic explanation of saying, although they both conquered the north and the south, but because Islam is the higher religion, Islam had existed years before the British came. There's a history of Islam. The British did not want any kind of additional burden on their head trying to convince people to move from Islam to Christianity.
Can I? Okay. Yes. Can I just do a quick addition? Let me add something. Let me just add something as it explained. Okay. Karen, I will agree with you that yes, Islam was more than a religion. Something just came to mind. Remember that Islam was also used as some form of economic hard power. You know, during that decades or centuries, before the coming of Europeans. You know, when the Arabs brought Islam, the people around that region at that time were bound to convert to that religion, to have some sort of economic advantage. So that would be one of the unifying point of Islam at that point. Then when you also add that to Usman Dan Fodio words, in the attempt to quote and unquote, purify the religion or to unify it, throughout Hausa land, then you will also know that, Islam was more than a religion. It had more deeper, meaning and relevance to the people there. I don't think there's anywhere in the south where religion was used as some form of economic advantage. I don't know, but I don't think I've read any. So, and that is why Usman Dan Fodio still becomes, that's why we read about him to today. Who knows? Maybe if Usman Dan Fodio hasn't done his jihad words or hasn't, unified this Islam or spread this, certain brand of Salafist Islam at that point in time, then probably the Hausas, would have been more tolerant to a different religion. So I'm just thinking out loud anyway. It might be possible.
So 2 points I'd like to make, 2 salient points I'd like to make. One, we tend to look at the colonialist with rose-tinted glasses in terms of the fact that we forget that the colonial expansion thing was not a charity work, was not charity work. They were looking to make money from it. They converted charter companies they nationalized charter companies. So it was all economics, right? Because if it were just the missionary thing, they already had that. They already had missionaries coming, missionary contacts, before they decided that they needed to convert certain companies, to nationalize them, and so they can control the economic proceeds from these companies. So what they would look at it, I would think that how they would look at it would be strictly, from an economic point of view, ease of management. Now, we talk about the North and the South. When you look at India and Pakistan, because the same British ran India and Pakistan, and they ran them as one country, right? India, as it is, they have more gods than we have, I think, in terms of our traditional religion. They have all sorts of gods. You see all sorts. Everybody has a god in India. They have, they have all sorts of idols and gods and everything and all that. And when the British left India, they left Indians with all their gods and all their things, and the Hindus are still worshipping all the things they were worshipping for God knows how long. So it was quite possible that the British could run an empire and not tamper with the religion. And I think sometimes what we are conflating is the job of the missionaries and the colonialists. Yes, they may have things in common, but they were very different. The colonialists were business people looking to expand empire and earn income. They did that in India. They did not look at converting the Hindus to Christianity. And Hindu is not an Abrahamic religion, is it? And the Hindus were left to practice what they practice. As a matter of fact, after a while, after the British had left, the Pakistan split, the Islamic part split away from the Hindu part. So, I'm thinking that we are conflating the primary goal of the colonialists, which was economics, and in terms of ease of administration, with the fact that we already had missionary influence, we had different goals altogether, which was to spread the word and all that. There were certain times and certain instances where those two interests converged. But generally, if you look to India, you would see examples where they did not converge. They allowed the locals keep their religion. And they just focused on which was administration and making money out of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, you can. I wanted to just respond to acidics by saying that I agree with you. I understand what you're saying.
Sorry, Kenana. Let Remy.
Okay.
Yeah, then you can argue. Remy.
Yeah, just listening to everyone, just some few points from my whole perspective. I think talking about the introduction of Western education to northern Nigeria, I don't think it's a single story because the emirs, they've got their intention, and I think Max covered a lot of that in his book. Even the colonialists, they've got their own intention, and as usual, there's always a common denominator. Mr. Lord Lugard again. So I do read somewhere a book Class, Ethnicity, and Democracy in Nigeria, where one of the things that he said was Lugard was also against the introduction of Western education to northern Nigeria. And his quote was that because of the utter disrespect for British and native ideals that they were seeing in the South. So he doesn't want that in the North too. So, it's not really a single story. And I don't even think it's just because of Islam. I don't really know sometimes what goes on in the head of the British. An example would be Sudan. Northern Sudan, Islamic, Arabic. They introduced education there. They got them educated. They separated and they introduced what they call the Southern policy. And they kept the South away from education. They said they want to keep them, and their animates, they follow their traditional religion. They want to keep them as close to their traditional religion. And they barely introduced education to them at the independence. So I really don't know what their objectives are at times. And then, the acceptance of, Christianity or the spread of Christianity in a place like Southwest Nigeria, for example. Two things. I think one is a class issue, that was behind it. Because when you see the earliest set of Christians in Western Nigeria are mostly ex-slaves or their descendants and probably non-aristocratic groups. We should remember that between the time the Atlantic slave trade ended and by the time the southern region became a protectorate, there was still domestic slavery, which led to a lot of social inequality. So you have, these ex-slaves, both the returnees from Sierra Leone and Co., as well as some of the ones that escaped. They collaborated, I think as Asidi said, they were the ones that really collaborated with these white folks. And it's not just about, because the missionary schools, they were already in Western Nigeria. And as at 1884, when the whole of Yoruba land was not when there was no political power, it was just the missionaries. There was just 6,521 converts in the whole of Yoruba land. East, West, every Yoruba land. 3,450 of that in Lagos. Right. So sometimes, until the political power came in, by entry into former taking over of the territories, and then with some of the perceived advantages. An example would be by the time Lagos became protectorate, a colony in 1861. One of the things that was noticed was that by 1870, when divorce was made into law, women started running from part of Western Nigeria into Lagos. Especially people that were ex-slaves that were married into family. So there was a kind of perceived liberty that they felt it gave them. So those people like slaves, their descendants, it's perspective of me as a person. If I know I'm going to be offered as a sacrifice, I'll gladly embrace Christianity. But in spite of that, it didn't really spread in Yoruba land, even in 1884, until you now have the political power with the British now coming in and now, ruling the place and now providing that political, that convergence between the religion and the political side, and providing protection for the people that count themselves as downtrodden. That was when it really spread. So, is it net positive? Is it net negative? I think it's perspective from my own perception. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Remy. Okay.
Sorry, Serena. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Casey and Sarah More, were you guys able to? Did you guys have any contribution to make to this topic?
Well, I just wanted to. I heard something Asidik said, and I wanted to corroborate it. I like he made mention of a point where about the colonialists and the what do you call them, the missionaries, and that using India, that it was very possible to actually go in and leave the tradition, the culture, and the indigenous religion intact. And it just brought up my people's experience. That's the Benin Kingdom. And like he said, in cases where these two now conflated, they combined to gain inroads. Because if you look at the story of the Benin Kingdom, when the Portuguese first made contact, the Benin kings played very smart. If you check the Benin kind of religious or spiritual thing, the king, the Oba, is the centerpiece. Do you understand? So like it all comes through him to his acolytes and all that throughout the kingdom. He is the centerpiece. So he made sure that he controlled how the whole interaction with the Portuguese was. So he wanted to be mainly economical, and then getting technology from them to improve war and all that. He really didn't want anybody to tamper with the religious aspects. And the Benin already had a reputation outside that the Portuguese took back stories of how they were civilized and all that. Now, when the British came, watch how it changed. The British wanted to control trade around the Goton ports, and because the Benins were exacting taxes from the vassal states like Lagos. Lagos was known as Eko to the Benin. They were collecting levies and all that from them. The Shekis, the Benin king was really getting a lot of money from everybody. So the British were trying to get in on all that action. And the next thing they could do was, now we were having great rep outside before as civilized and all that. All of a sudden, the Benins became the leaders of dark arts. The king was called a leader in dark magic. I'm even reading the paper because I went to check online. There's a paper about from a man in University of Siollun, or what was I'll check again, where he said Benin was referred to as city of blood for engaging in high number of human sacrifices, which was not true because it was done. Yes, it was done. Human sacrifices were done, but they were very limited scope, such as when the king dies, and in some very very revered sacrifice. Like there was one where they said some years before then, when during the Ugwe Ivie, sorry, I can't really get the pronunciation. Festival. It's a very, very important festival where the Benin king is trying to show his, religious and spiritual might. Now, this festival even caused problem with the British. Now, the Oni of Ife had already sent a message through someone who had a vision then that he should be careful of the British. And because of this, he now tried to even, double down on that spiritual and religious role he was playing. Now, the British had started spreading all their rumors. And the next thing, the only way they could come in was, okay, let's label very diabolical and all that. And then, after the Portuguese, he had cut off, the king decided to cut off, contacts. Whites were no longer allowed to come into the kingdom, as in to see him during that festival or so. But what now they used to get a war, to instigate a war, you can read about it. They sent an envoy during one of those times when you're not supposed to come to see him or so. Although the king didn't sanction his council went and released soldiers and they attacked the British and killed them. So you can see that in this case now, the whole economic push for power now conflicted with their whole Christianity and all that, and they used that to attack the Benin Kingdom. And then if after the kingdom fell, you can now see that they now made inroads. By 1914 or so, when they reinstalled the Oba, the second in command, that's the Yase, the Obaseki, the second highest ranking in the kingdom, was the highest converse they could get. And from then on, it went downhill. Because now they've made inroads into the city. They can do and undo. They can start imagine you can convert the second highest in the royal, in the hierarchy and all that. So I like that point about sometimes the economic, they used it at the front, to get their economic gains. Yeah, I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Sorry, Clarissa. Sorry, Wilson. Are you? Sorry, I didn't get a lot of the things that you said, but are you perhaps suggesting that the evasion of the Benin Kingdom, there was a religious connotation to it? Is that what you're saying? Because the expedition of the Benin Kingdom, in my view, based on what I have read, had nothing to do with human sacrifices that were being carried out in the Benin Kingdom.
I can't say, no, maybe you didn't get what I was saying. Yes, it was purely economical, but I was saying,
having direct dealings in terms of trade with Britain at the time. They were using a middleman because the Benin people were already very wary of the British, right? And so he had the king at the time imposed some sort of, I think it's called a dash that they had to pay, sort of like a levy that they had to pay. And because the Britain, they didn't want to continue to pay it, right? So they said they were coming to discuss trade with the people of Benin. I'm just saying, yes, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think this context, I don't think it applies in this context, because that's not what they use for the punitive expedition of the Benin Kingdom. I don't think so. But there are other historians in the house that can correct me. Maybe I'm the one that's not understanding what you're saying.
What you're both saying is complementary, right? So yes, they obviously they had economic motivations, right? But to justify the invasion of the kingdom, they had to, do a lot of negative propaganda about the Benin people and their traditional and ritual practices. So, in that sense, Osero Moritu is also correct by saying that the other motivation, was also sort of like to cause like a cultural reform or a cultural change, because so for you to justify your actions, which included a lot of killings and it was essentially a war, and at the time you had to basically provide justifications to the colonial office in London. So there were a lot of communications where they accused the Benin people of killing human beings and using them for human sacrifice, and so they basically exaggerated a lot of things that were indeed happening at the time. And it's a common feature of the British, right? So, and it's what Acidic said about how economic and religious motivations could converge. Another very good example would be the Ijaye community under the leadership of Are Kuromi. So Kuromi was a guy who did not allow the missionaries to have like a free reign in preaching the Christian religion. But that didn't matter to the British office because, again, what really primarily concerned them was the ability to extract economic benefits. And so Kuromi eventually got into their crosshairs when he started to impose taxes and to also block market access, particularly to the Ibadan. So when he got into a fight with the Ibadan, right, and some other Yoruba territories at the time, the British government felt like their economic interest was threatened. And so the missionaries were very happy to basically go along with the colonial office to invade Kuromi's Ijaye, because they also did not like Kuromi because he prevented them from preaching and also altered the spread of the Christian faith in the time. So yeah, I mean, they are distinct entities, but as Acidix pointed out, their interest, merged at certain points and in certain contexts. So I think that you're both correct in what you're saying. Only that, it could apply in different contexts.
All right. So I just want to stay on the topic, if you guys don't mind. So the topic again says what Britain did to Nigeria. So I'm not really understanding. So are we saying, I don't know, what's the question all about? So are we trying to argue if what they did in Nigeria was okay, or if they should never have come to Nigeria in the first place? I'm not really sure I understand what the whole argument and discussion is.
So OG, so we're reviewing the final chapters of the book, right? So Kenena just did the synopsis of one of the chapter, and that's what people are commenting on. So we're not justifying or excusing anything. We're just reviewing what has been written in the book and trying to apply social context or draw parallels with what existed at the time and what might exist today, and also consider what could be the outcome if certain events did not take place. So it's not a justification or excuse of anything. It's just a simple analysis of the event and to also see the implications and consequences of certain decisions and actions at the time.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I haven't really read the book, but again, I do have a lot of opinions. I've read other books about, the British colonialism, not just Nigeria, but like everywhere. But I wouldn't really comment on this because I haven't read the book, and I really appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much. Paris, I think we can move now to the next.
Kenena, I wonder if you have any final comments so that we move to the next chapter.
I wanted to address the point about Acidix made about how the British ruled in India and Pakistan, and by saying that it reinforces my position that it was about power. Now, you couldn't come to India and say you want to influence them or you want to convert them because they had an existing religion that had existed before your Abrahamic religions came into play, and that was being practiced by millions of people. Like I said, who knew Amadioha? Who knew Shango outside Nigeria? But Hindus were everywhere. In fact, Persians, once Hindu had penetrated Persia, penetrated Afghanistan. So it was an existing religion. So the British could not have come and say, I want to convert. I mean, it's going to be, it didn't make it was not going to make any sense. Meanwhile, we all know very well that the East Indian Company, part of the problems they had in India was that there was a mutiny by Muslims and Hindus. And that's why the British said to say, you know what, we're going to get involved in India now. Because of course they sent their usual company, go and see how that place is. They got there and the East Indian people didn't understand what they were doing. And so the Hindu soldiers and Muslim soldiers revolted. And I mean, they brought back the dethroned Raj or Nawab of Bengal, you know. And so I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. The environments were entirely different. The religious structure or religious composition entirely different. And we need to always remember that Hindu as a religion had existed before this Abrahamic, before this Abrahamic religions even came. And it was widespread. So the British couldn't come and say, we are coming to, remember, even the British instituted non-intervention religiously because they didn't want to come and scatter ground again. You're coming to dominate them politically. You don't want to come and dominate them religiously. They won't accept it. So you have to choose one. The South didn't have that. We didn't have that power to be able to dictate to the British. We could accept economic domination, but we're not going to accept religion because we did not have a unified religious situation, unlike the British, unlike Islam, unlike Hindus. You know, I always like us to always look at our own situations. Okay, this was the problem. I made an argument one day saying that if Igbo people had known, they should have forced their way and ensured that everybody worshipped Amadioha. Maybe if everybody in the whole of Southeast worshipped one single God, it's possible that the way the British came and forced Christianity on us, they wouldn't have been able to succeed. Again, this is my notion. I might not be right. You know, that's what I wanted to say. And thanks. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. I think someone else can go on.
Hi guys, good evening. This is Zurike. This is a really interesting question. Did it means justify the ends or the other way around? It's a difficult question to answer really because we are where we are, and there's never been any real contrition, I would use that word, even till today from what the British have done. They say, oh, it happened a long time ago. Well, it happened in my grandfather's time. So it's not really that long time ago. Should we all be speaking English? Well, we are. It's really, so it can be a bitter pill to swallow that they've done this. They don't care. From all my research and studies that I've been doing recently, it doesn't appear to me that both in Nigeria what happened and in India what happened, and we can just take a global look at what's been done by Europeans everywhere. That they just went everywhere, brutalizing everybody everywhere. They had no care. So I'm tending to err on the side of no, they weren't justified to do what they did, and they had no right to do what they did. Was there something good that they brought? Probably yes. But if I just take a broad view of what they've done, it's very difficult. But it's good that we've had a historian, Dr. Max, has been able to chronicle all of these events in a way that we can digest them and then have some more understanding. And you guys here have been breaking down from various angles and various different aspects to kind of knit everything together. So from that aspect, it's good to understand what's happened in the past. Does it inform what we are doing today? It still does. I've asked before, why is Nigeria called Nigeria? We know the answer to that question. Does that help us or does it hinder us? yes and no. Is there any way around it? Probably yes and no. So are we in a conundrum? I don't know. But things in the country, if we can call it a country, I don't think I'd look at the similarities with our brothers and sisters in the United States of America. They going through their own almost parallel strife and struggle, and theirs is directly affecting them with the probability that large proportion of African American men are in prison, deliberately so. So the system is very, very oppressive directly, when the system in Nigeria is still indirect oppression in a way, if I can categorize it like that. So it's historically we need to understand what's going on and why, and then we need to look forward and what can we do to alleviate any kind of suffering that might still be there. With education, that's one of the major tools that we should use to try and elevate ourselves and other people as well. I just want to make that point. Thank you, guys. I yield.
Thank you, Azuwike. Clarissa.
Okay, sorry. Jojo, I think Joe wanted to say something.
Yes. I really appreciate the opportunity that I have here to be able to talk and to air my views here. And I thank the moderators and every other person here. While I'll be keeping my my submission short, I'll be focusing more on the 19th century, with the British being able to establish the two protectorates, North and the South. I wanted to bring to everyone's attention that the prelude was the fall of the Arrow Confederacy. So that brings us back to what the brother talked about in the religion. Religion is a very strong part of government. We have seen it played out over and over again. And then the coin, if the coin is the government, the two faces are politics and religion. So what happened with our forefathers, they didn't have the foresight, either or not, or they did have that, but they didn't have the force or the power to forestall the agenda of the British. However, we are where we are, like the other brother said. And what do we do now? Do we go back to the old ways and having recognized that the religion of the oppressors logically would never help us, because it was in the name of that same God that they oppressed us with. Therefore, it wouldn't make any sense for us to gain freedom with the same God, because it doesn't, it's conundrum. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know how to explain that, because Einstein once said that when you have a problem coming from a mindset of solution at a particular time, you're not going to be able to use the same mindset to solve a problem in a different time set. So with that being said, so the problem we had came out of the relationship we had and relations we had with the oppressors. And we have this way of thinking where our psyche has been muddled up with the new way of thinking, which suits the oppressor. And now how can we solve our problem and gain the liberty of the mind using the same way, the method that we learned from the oppressor? We can clearly see here that whatever we do with that same methodology will not benefit us. It will only enslave us, whether physically or mentally. So my submission ends with a reconsideration to what religion is for us in the diaspora and for all African descendants. And we have to redefine that solely, but we have to be critical in our thought process, where in fact every other group, like say the Chinese, the Indians, they somehow recognize higher powers that have something to do with them. They
a higher power that they belong to, and that higher power is in them, and they're in that higher power, and them and the higher power are one. So what happened to us? What do we do now? So there's enough room. There's still a lot of room for us to decide what we do. If we would have bent in one direction where religion is concerned, that would have made the British understand the need to allow us to be in that sense. When the brother explained about the situation in India, so I kind of relate to that because they made it very clear that they're not going to convert to any other religion, which is something that we didn't do back then. I mean, our ancestors didn't do. But today, knowledge is abounding, and now we know better. What do we do? Do we completely forget our ways? Do we do a total recall? Do we make adjustments? And, to each his or her own, but let's be very critical as we think it through. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Kenena, do you have any response, or do we move on? Can you guys hear me?
No, Clarissa, I think people have made their point, and I think everybody's point is clear. And for us, like what I said, I think the learning curve for us is what are the things we need to unwind. Some of the things we need to unwind to ensure that we build a society where we're able to choose what we define. That's what I think. That's what I think the learning curve for us is, because there are just too many moving parts, in this conversation. So I think I don't want us to dwell too much on the Christian and Cross chapter. I think some people we should go on with other chapters.
Thanks, Kenena. So the next chapter is People of the Book. Funsho, please give us a synopsis before we discuss.
All right, thank you very much, guys. I've learned a lot so far. So, People of the Book is in chapter 18, page 265. The author starts by explaining that in the first 50 years of Nigeria's experience, Nigeria's existence, rather, along that lines. There were also deliberate attempts. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I received the call.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay, thank God you're back.
All right. So there were deliberate attempts. After I think we read in Dele Ogun's book. Sorry for cross-referencing another book. How there would be, even the missionaries themselves had differing ideas on what structure the curriculum, the Christian education curriculum should take. There was a guy who wanted it to be more robust. That's the guy who wanted the geography, physics, math, everything included. But people like Henry Townsend were more centered around Christianity, which reminds us that most of the missionaries who came to Africa were actually quite fanatic and were the reactionaries of their countries, right? So they were basically the backward men of Europe that came now to impose said Christianity. So one can understand where Kelena is coming from when he gets overcritical of them. Then education in northern Nigeria, the author considers that because the education itself was driven by missionaries, which meant that to get that Western education, people very often had to learn Christian doctrine. That created a social barrier already in northern Nigeria. So there was deliberate resistance to it. So that created two concepts. You had the Ilimin Islamiyya, that's the Quranic education, and you have the Ilimin Boko, that's Western education. And Boko Haram, as we know it today, that's a militant Islamic right-wing fundamentalist group that literally is named after saying Western education is evil. But anyway, the commissioner of Northern Nigeria, that's Lord Lugard at the time, limited the number of Western education-oriented schools in Northern Nigeria. Christian missionaries first arrived in North in 1841. However, it wasn't until nearly 60 years later in both Bede and Lokoja, which ideally are not even really Northern Nigeria per se. Those were now the places that got the mission schools. We also learned that a lot of the mission schools were, restricted to areas that were outside of the Sokoto Caliphate's sphere of Islamic influence, but still sort of within its boundaries. And again, we learned that the deliberate lack of enthusiasm by the Lugards and all of these administrators was that it sort of like served them. It served them well to have a northern population that wasn't as educated as the South. In the South, they found it very difficult to exploit Southerners. If you read Dele Ogun's version of this section, what you learn is that when Lugard when he first became Governor General of Nigeria in 1914, he had to move to Lagos, and he basically brought that mentality of feudalism from the north and tried to slam everything exactly the way it is in the south. Siollun has talked about the effects of indirect rule in eastern Nigeria, where they had to create warrant chiefs. In the southwest, that included the complete removal of an entire native educated. So you have natives who were already educated, and he sort of like replaced their entire judicial system and turned it into sort of like a one-man show, and people rebelled immediately. In Dele Ogun's book, we read Lagos. There was a Lagos Weekly editorial, I think about 2 or 3 pages, that slammed Lord Lugard. It felt like reading a David Hundeyi type of article. That's what reading it felt like, and basically slammed Lord Lugard as an old school guy, someone who lived in the past, and so on and so forth. So to avoid that type of resistance to his form of autocratic rule, Lugard basically also kind of acquiesced to the
reluctance of the northern emirs to accept education. And I often say that it speaks to the character also of these northern emirs, because again, I always say they could have just picked what they wanted from the education. They could have created an Arabic curriculum that still took care of, that still inculcated that version of Western education that helps people, analyze and, become critical thinkers, But then, of course, these people were Islamic religious fanatics, hypocrites and so on. So it's, going by modern standards, it would be too much you can't ask for too much. But anyway, the final section in this chapter is on the effects of Western education, specifically in southern Nigeria. What you have really, to just summarize, is colonization of consciousness. What it created was a I don't know if I should call an Android version of British people. That's in black people. So you had Nigerians now who wore English clothes, adopted Western culture, and so on. One of the byproducts of that was that some of these people also began to look down on their own locals themselves. That's in southern Nigeria. They would, sort of like look upon, because most of them were educated in these mission schools. It wasn't unusual for them to look down upon, people, other Nigerians that maybe did not speak English or maybe were not Christians, right? So, in the north, since only a very few select people were allowed to be educated, and most of these were educated at Barewa College, what you find is a further demarcation between the Talakawa, that's the northern common men, that's the lower classes, the third estate, and what you have now are the educated, the sons of emirs, sons of aristocrats, sons of military Sokoto men, and so on and so forth. So what you now have is you don't really get to have a northern middle class.
1 second, please. Mazi Ezeoke in the audience, please, can you check your back channel? I messaged you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what you have is in the north the total non-existence of a northern middle class, right? So the elite now are educated, and that elite exploitation of the third estate just simply continues in northern Nigeria, right? So those are that's what the author summarizes as the effects, as one of the effects rather of colonial education. Then there's also the focus on the Igbos, who very speedily, seeing the advantages of Western education, speedily gaining that education, and then being assigned to the Northern Civil Service. That's the civil service of the colonial administration in the north. Again, they still needed educated people to run an effective colonial apparatus. The people they are colonizing in the north don't want to learn their language. The method is still an insidious form of indirect rule. The indirect rule is already being shaped off in the south because you have more and more southerners gaining education. In the north, it's still the same way. So what you see is, a sort of panic, which is essentially one of the things, a sort of panic from the northern elites and, the northern population. Essentially, that leads to the Nigerian Civil War of 1967 to 1970. So those are the effects of Western education on colonial Nigeria, and that's the end of the chapter. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Funshaw. Any comments, questions, contributions?
Yeah, I forgot to mention, Femi Oluto in the audience just reminded us that CMS Grammar School in Bariga, which is a suburb in Lagos State, is the oldest secondary school in Nigeria. It was founded 6th June 1859 by the Church Missionary Society, I think there were much older schools though in Ibadan and Abeokuta, but probably this is the more formal ones because when you read and are in there, they formed tiny schools and so on. But I guess this will suffice. Thank you. Thank you, Femi.
All right. Any comments, contributions, questions to that chapter, the people of the book from that Funsho has just kindly summarized for us? Okay. In the absence of any of that, let's move on to the next one. What's the next one?
Indirect rule. That's key.
Okay, indirect rule. Please take it away.
Thank you, Clarissa. I might not return it, but if I take it away. Okay, so now this chapter is called Indirect Rule, and in it the author, Max Siollun, explored the conscription of the local ruling systems that were present in the native regions into the British arrangements, and how the British officials at the time essentially just ruled the people using their local leaders as proxy rulers at the time. So the chapter opened by essentially posing the problem that the British administrative officers faced in Nigeria, what is present-day Nigeria, and the fact that they had very few officers in the country, relative to the population. In fact, it did say that there were about 200 British administrative officers in Nigeria at the time, even though the population of the country was around 20 million. So clearly it was disproportionate. Now, so the author tried to investigate why this was so. Now, according to George Goldie, who was essentially the forerunner for the British colonialist, his own theory was that the natives would rather be led by the worst of them than to accept the leadership of even the best of the British officers. And this is because George Goldie and his cohorts believed that they were doing the locals a favor by colonizing them. So his theory was that it was impossible for them to exert any form of direct rule over the locals because they'd rather be led by even the worst amongst them than to be, to accept the leadership of the best British officers at the time. But the author went further to say that even though George Goldie's theory may have made sense to him personally, there were other more pragmatic and practical reasons why there were inadequate personnel in terms of British officers in the country. And one of it was that, largely speaking, the British were running out of men to basically go and govern their colonies around the world, because of the politics of the time. And generally speaking, they just didn't have enough hands to govern. Now, it was quite acute. That shortage was acute in Western Africa for other natural factors. One of it was that they suffered high mortality rates in West Africa because of the heat, the humidity, and also, this is more commonly known, mosquitoes and malaria. So between the period 1895 to 1800, the death rates of the British officers at the time in Western Africa, particularly Nigeria, was around 7 to 10%. So they were dying a lot from the weather conditions and also mosquitoes and malaria. So a lot of the officers, in fact, spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to London because they had to travel back to recuperate before they came back into the country. So that gave West Africa a poor reputation amongst the British officers in London. They simply did not want to come here because they were not sure they would survive the very harsh conditions that they were exposed to. So most of them basically would come only because of the good pay and because they also enjoyed a greater degree of freedom. Now, according to Funsho, this freedom means that they engaged in sexual urges, but there was no reference to that in the book. That's just Funsho's theory.
It's not a theory, guys. No, there is proof of it. Even in the section called Colonial Life, Max Siollun touches briefly on it, and please Google the Happy Valley sets. They were Anglo-Irish settlers in East Africa, that went about their business doing that stuff, even here in Nigeria. So, yeah.
Okay, that's for sure, reinforcing his point that they came for the pay and also for the sexual urges. Now, so unlike in South Africa and Zimbabwe, where you had like proper settler colonies, that could not
work in Nigeria because of the harsh conditions. So essentially, they basically had to rely on the indigenous agents in the country, using the system of indirect rule that actually worked for them in Uganda and also in India. So now, as earlier defined, indirect is simply just co-opting the local rulers into the British colonial system, as proxy agents. So they would just hide behind the local rulers and then use them to control the people. Now, so the chapter also went on to look at how indirect rule system worked in northern Nigeria. Now, in northern Nigeria, it worked almost, hand in glove because of the feudal system that had already existed in the north. So essentially, they basically just deposed emirs that were not amenable to the plan and restored them with emirs that embraced their leadership, and simply just toppled the Sokoto Caliphate that had captured, the most part of the north at the time, and he used them as the proxy rulers to control the entire north. Now, this worked for them perfectly because for the indirect rule system to work, you needed like an arrangement that put some people at the apex and others at the bottom. So all the British officers had to do was simply to claim authority over those who were ruling the arrangement and become the new rulers. Of course, with the exception that they would not, be up front and center. They would merely just be behind the curtain and be directing what was going on. So we'll consider it like a puppet and puppeteer kind of arrangement. So basically, when they got to the north, when the north became a protectorate of Britain, they simply went around to coerce the emirs into accepting this system. Now, it was very, very successful, right? And so it got so successful that they tried to also replicate the same thing in the southern Nigeria, which was where, of course, they encountered a lot of problems. So they also enjoyed relative success in the southwest, according to the book, because the southwest, even before the colonial masters arrived, had pre-colonial chiefs that also wielded significant power in terms of administrative control. So by co-opting these pre-colonial chiefs into the British system, they were able to enjoy relative success with their indirect rule agenda. But where things went completely south for them, no pun intended, was in the southeastern part of the country. Now, you have to understand that the indirect rule system simply meant preserving the existing order of things, but only putting yourself at the apex, right? But in the southeastern part of the country, because there was no feudal arrangement at the time, and because the people had no one central authority, they had to basically dismantle what they met and try to reenact a completely different and alien, system. Now, the southeastern part of Nigeria at the time had the Efik, the Igbo, and also the Ibibio as some of the ethnic tribes that were residing there. And how it was structured was that they had small villages that all had political autonomy from one another. So you would not find large kingdoms ruled by, one ruler or any kind of power centralization in those parts. That, of course, posed a problem to the British because, there was no way for the indirect rule system to work efficiently given the political arrangements at the time. And so because they could not find any chief to topple and simply use to control the people, they planned to manufacture their own chiefs. And the way they did it was to select people using an arbitrary system and giving them warrants to basically go back and rule over the people. And that led to a phenomenon called the warrant chiefs. Now, these warrant chiefs had a lot of criticism, one of which is the arbitrary selection, that went into, certifying anyone to rule as a warrant chief. Now, because the British had very poor understanding of social relations in those parts, right? So they basically could not, set up or design any kind of meaningful or sensible system within which these new leaders would emerge. So the writer gave several instances of how they simply selected people who had done a favor to the British officers at the time, whether to act as a spy or basically to do them any kind of favor, and then they simply rewarded them with the warrant certificates to go and preside over the people as the new rulers. One of the examples that was given was that of a woman called Ahebi Ubabe. Now, this woman, according to the book, was a sex worker who was born in Igbo land but fled to Igala land. And so she had sexual relationship with the Ata of Igala, the ruler of Igala at the time, and also had sexual relations with some British colonial officers. Because of these sexual relationship, and also because she was a polyglot, she could speak several languages. She was given a certificate as a warrant chief, making her the first and perhaps the only female warrant chief in Igbo land at the time. There were also other instances, right, that according to the author provided a tragicomic outcome. So because of the British reputation for basically deposing chiefs and also sentencing them to prison or exiling them from their lands, whenever the British officials would call for meetings with the locals, no one would show up, or very few people would show up at all. People merely considered it as, one step to slavery or to imprisonment. So when the British officials would go to villages to call for nominations as warrant chiefs, because of this fear, the people would nominate people, individuals that they wanted, to see their backs in the community. So in one instance, in a particular community, when the British called for nomination for a warrant chief, someone who was considered a nuisance and a person that they actually wanted to evict from the community was brought forward to the British, believing that the moment they take him away, he would never return to the community. So imagine their shock and surprise when they saw him return with a warrant that he was now their new chief and effectively the ruler of the community. Now, because of the realization that becoming a warrant chief basically gave you power that did not exist before in the lands, and also certain perks and privileges of power, there was now a rush, amongst the Igbo people, to become chiefs. This rush led to the production of a plethora of chiefs at the time. And of course, there was also the accompanying problems of abuse of power, extortion, and the desire by the warrant chiefs to live like British resident officers, essentially brutalizing their own people and extorting them of their resources at the time. It was also a common practice for warrant chiefs to basically compel the people to work on their farms by claiming that it was a white man's project. They also would buy hammocks and force their own people to carry them around in the same way they had seen the British resident officers behave in other colonies. There was also a mention of a judicial system formed in Igbo land at the time, and they were called native courts. The author also painted a picture of how court messengers at the time became a characterization of the native courts and were quite abusive to the people. They would demand bribes, sell verdicts to the highest bidder, and simply just practice all kinds of corruption because, they wanted to extract benefits. Now, also because the warrant chiefs at the time were paid by the taxes and fines, collected from the people, they had additional incentive to keep the courts busy by basically creating all kinds of cases against the people and summoning them to the courts to pay fines and also, arbitrary taxes. It was just a general, atmosphere of corruption and oppression. And this was because, according to the author's analysis of the book, the British had created a power dynamic that did not exist before amongst the people. And they had also empowered those who were considered as non-entities and those who had no preparation whatsoever to wield the kind of power that they were handed by the British officers. So the chapter also evaluated the legacy of the indirect rule system, especially in the north and also in the southeastern parts of the country. And so in the north, one of the enduring legacy of the indirect rule system was that other parts of the north that had resisted the Fulani Sokoto Caliphate empire at the time were forced and united under the caliphate for administrative competence by the British. The author gave the example of the KB Hausa states that had fought and resisted the Fulani Sokoto Caliphate invasion at the time. But because the British would find it far more convenient to rule over all of the entire north as a single entity, they essentially invaded the KB Hausa states and forced them to accept the leadership and control of the caliphate, because for them, it made it easier for them to administer the entire region under a single leadership system. The same thing also, the same fate befell the Tiv people, right, who had also resisted and fought against the Sokoto Fulani invasion at the time. In the southeast, the indirect rule system had a legacy of creating new axes of power. So because of the warrant chief system, there was the emergence of new big men and new chiefs in the southeast. Another legacy was also the creation of paramount rulers who did not exist before the arrival of the colonialists. Now, in the southeast particularly, there was nothing called paramount rulers or chiefs, because it was just an assemblage of little small villages that all had political autonomy from one another. One of the enduring legacy of the colonial masters was the creation of offices with the title paramount chiefs or paramount rulers. And that enduring legacy was also that because the warrant chiefs could have access to resources and funds, they were able to purchase elite education for their children. Interestingly, some of their spawns and Siollun's, emerged as one of the leaders of Nigeria, even till today. So the author mentioned the likes of Godswill Akpabio, who is the senator and former governor of Akwa Ibom State. His father was once a warrant chief. Same also with Geoffrey Onyema, who is today Nigeria's foreign minister. He also mentioned a member of parliament in the United Kingdom, Chi Onwura, whose father or grandfather was also a warrant chief. And so the chapter concluded by trying to investigate who was the original architect of this indirect rule system that worked perfectly in northern Nigeria, in Uganda, and also in India. And so he said, although Lord Lugard would claim credit for the indirect rule system, it was actually George Goldie who was the original mastermind behind the plan. Now, it's not surprising to hear that Lord Lugard would claim credits for someone else's work, given that before he came to Nigeria or West Africa, particularly in Uganda, he had been in India where he had a sexual relationship with someone else's wife. So Lord Lugard had a long history of stealing things that did not belong to him. And he was also a short man, according to historical accounts. So that really ends the chapter. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, P, for that synopsis. It was very easy to follow, very easy to understand, very interesting to listen to. Any comments, questions, contributions on that? So, Madina, I know you raised your hand. I wonder if you have any contribution to make to everything that P has said. So, Madina, are you there? Anyone else with any questions, contributions to this particular chapter before we move to the next one? No? All right. Let's move to the next one. I think the next one is indirect rule. Funsho, please take it away.
Yeah, just a moment, Clarissa. Yeah, you were calling my name. I was not close to my phone. So, yes. So for the part that was read, where the references were made to the systems in the East, as we keep digging down history, we tend to understand that instead of saying that there was no central authority, but that does not exclude the fact that there was a system, a democratic system in place that the British or the colonial masters did not understand very well. And it was for that reason that the people in that region were actually tagged as the way they were tagged, whether as village people or bush people, as some books would have put it. And that was mainly due to the fact that the sort of political system that existed within those communities were totally different from what was prevalent in the United Kingdom at the time. So I just wanted to chime that in.
Sorry, so Madina, I couldn't quite get the point. Sorry, if you could just explain a sentence.
Yeah, exactly. So the part where you read about the warrant chiefs and the old indirect rule, saying that the warrant chief or the rulership system was because there was no central authority doesn't really paint the story. The actual reality was there was a system that the British could not recognize and that they did not understand, that would not work very well with their own structure. So that was the case at the time, because all of these communities, they've always had a form of self-governance prehistorically.
Oh, I see. Fair point.
Okay. Any other contributions before we move to the next chapter or questions? No? Great. Funshaw, please take away the next chapter, Sino. Sure.
God Almighty.
Clarissa, after you are leading. Please.
Sanopo, I'm sure you are in the matrix. Please mute your mic. And every time. What is he saying now? You're in the matrix. Like, mute your mic. Your mic, we are trying to relocate school shops to an urban center. So
Pick one.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we're working very hard to relocate school shops to an urban community. But while we work out the final, you guys should please bear with us. Maybe Ubuntu should just go so that Funshaw can, call his network service provider and sort it out.
Yes, please let me go.
Hear me now.
No, we can't. Yeah, we can hear you. Oh God. Funshaw, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right, I'm so sorry, guys. I live in Ibadan, in a pretty central area. I still don't get why I have these issues. So, yeah, my apologies. Colonial Life is chapter 20. I hope people can still hear me. Go ahead.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So, Colonial Life dives into the, day-to-day socio-political life of the colonists and the people they are colonizing. That's the author examines the shifting dynamics between both sides. Starts by describing who were the colonists themselves. So they were usually either soldiers, private traders, missionaries, or bureaucrats. Of course, we've learned in previous chapters that the first wave of colonists, as we know them, would be the missionaries, or I guess we will say the traders. But then, of course, we know back then in the time of the Portuguese, in the medieval times, when they met the Benin and the kings of Aladdin and so on, for them it was more of a business-minded relationship. With the arrival of men like George Tubman Goldie, it becomes now more colonialist centered. But then, of course, the commerce is what the political takeover sits on. Really, the commerce is supposed to serve the purpose of economic exploitation. So really, you also had the bureaucrats, right? Those are the people they sent from Britain to help administer the place. P has described when he talked about indirect rule, how the British, first of all, Nigeria could not be a settler state. The weather condition was not quite favorable to white people. I think they were more used to a less humid and warm climate. So, they were more comfortable in East Africa, for example. And in West Africa, they will often fall sick to ailments like malaria and so on. In fact, if you read most of their diaries, they died very often of malaria, typhoid, and so on. Colonialism, right? The entire experience, it helped, the British who they sent to Nigeria achieve a certain level of comfort that they could not get in Britain. We've talked about how, people like Lord Lugard were not particularly the big boys in Europe. In Europe, they weren't the rich men of Europe. They were just probably simple middle class men. Someone like Goldie, his family, and amassed a small fortune. It would be like a British guy today discovering, oh, I have this £500,000, and someone tells me that on the banks of the Niger, I can set up a business for as little as £10,000, and make as much as 200k per year from it to keep adding to my family's fortune. So that's what drove men like them. The comfort they enjoyed, the catering, laundry, security guards, and so on. It was colonialist expatriates lifestyle. The worst excesses, of course, we're going to read more about. First of all, there's segregation. Although Nigeria was not a settler colony, the British personnel were required to segregate themselves. They had indigenous staff that lived in the south, for example, and probably up north as well. You had these educated natives that would live in GRs, that's government residential reservation areas. And then the people that they served, the white men themselves, lived in these very big houses. And within the compound of the big house, you had the small bungalow called the boys' quarters. And that's where that concept in Nigeria comes from. Usually in Nigeria, if you've been to Nigeria or you lived in Nigeria, you find people build their standalone bungalows or their standalone duplexes in a fenced compound, and then at one corner of the compound there's a tiny 1-bedroom or sometimes 2-bedroom bungalow that is meant to be the servants' quarters. So that's where this ideal comes from. And then there's talk about interracial relationships, right? You had the author also notes, I should mention that many middle class and upper middle class Nigerians still follow the segregated colonial housing pattern to this day. They live in a main house while their personal staff, cleaners, cooks, drivers, etc. live currently in boys' quarters. So on interracial relationships, these early British travelers, for example, that's the first wave of them, the Clappertons, the Lander brothers, and so on. These men had sexual relations with girls, okay? The author talks about Hugh Clapperton, who, was very attracted to Mandara women, right? He
also specify they had sexual relationships with native women.
Yes, with native women. In his journals, he very often references late night visits that he received from native women. Now, these are the earlier ones, this was very common for white people just strolling through the region. So, for example, Hugh Clapperton once proposed to a 15-year-old girl. Also, the author notes, colonialism had a bit of a patriarchal character, and considering the hot and humid climate, a lot of British women were not sent. By 1921, only 10% of colonialists, that's the white people on ground, were women. So very often, male colonists engaged in these, interracial relationships to quote-unquote hold body, and including Goldie, that's George Thurman Goldie, who we are told fathered as much as 3 kids with some women in the Niger Delta. I think Max Siollun mentions that he met some of George Goldie's descendants in Nigeria. I would love to meet them. Why? It would be interesting to talk to them. maybe they have some insight or something. Yeah. The colonial office very often tried to, hide these relationships. It was something that was kept secret. Again, the prevailing mindset is, of course, very racist. It wasn't something they wanted to be proud of per se, to say that they were sleeping with some black girls, but it was something that was very, very common, and they did it very often. The author talks about a secret memo that was introduced by Lugard. The author had mentioned earlier actually that Goldie could not have really done passed this memo to ban the association of colonial officers with native women, because he himself had been there, done that. Which to me, when I psychoanalyze both Lugard and Goldie, which is it's an ongoing thing I'm doing right now, I find that Goldie was probably less racist than Lugard, because I find that Goldie, for example, the story of how he ate meat from the hand of a leprous man, I feel like Lugard would rather shoot that man dead than eat meat off of that king's hand. And also the fact that Goldie actually fathered children, was involved, and so on and so forth, meant that to a certain extent, he understood the humanity of some black people, but Lugard straight up was just about his mission.
From the father children, look, they've not said anything in the book that says he was. He had claimed them as his kids or had taken care of them or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. True. That's true. Okay. I withdraw that comment. But anyway, Lugard passed a secret memo called Secular B, which was meant, and it was very, very well hidden. Although British officers talked about it, that when they arrived in Nigeria, they were warned, particularly the soldiers were warned not to get involved, not to get women pregnant in particular, and so on. So, in the north, apparently the British also, and which makes that this argument that colonialism was meant to be an enlightening experience for Africans. In the north, I think it paints a very, very different picture. The emirs would use, girls as young as 11, 12-year-olds as bribe to British officers, during political negotiations and so on. So, very many British officers used or had sex with young northern women. We have, for example, here, a British soldier called Burnham purchased an Hausa girl for just £1. He kept her around him for sex. Another Christian missionary in the north also kept a mistress, and one Lieutenant Crozier of the Northern Nigeria regiment talks about how the emir of Katsina usually used young women to bribe him, would put up a display and so on, and then they would have these secret meetings where the big men in the town will also come, and they will view the women in veil or unveiled, and they will choose the one they want and just buy them. So these arrangements were quite widespread, to the point that the fathers of some of these younger girls began to complain to the British resident, and the British resident always used the money to bribe them into silence and so on. The author talks about another young woman named Maimunatu. Maimunatu Darisari Abdullahi. So her name is Maimunatu Abdullahi. She had been kidnapped by the age of 12 by a British officer who slept with her until he completed his tour of duty and then moved back to England. And then she continued the relationship with one education officer called Dr. Rupert East. And that relationship was not an hidden relationship, like it was, quite in view of everybody. In eastern Nigeria, in Igbo land, there was a woman named Ada Ochauntu. I think she had an English name. Yeah, Esther Johnson was her English name. She got involved with a British railway worker named McCall. So in the course of that relationship, she loaned £400 to McCall, who went to England, used that money to buy his wife a car, and to buy his English wife a car. And, when he came back, for some reason, he told Ada Ocha, and really, she just stabbed him to death. She was condemned to die until Nnamdi Azikiwe pardoned her as Governor General in 1961. So those are some of the, sexual-related activities of these colonists. You have the next section talks about the colonial officers themselves, their autocratic nature. So I'm just going to run through some of their names. Harold Mode Douglas was based in the East, and he was extra autocratic. News of him, like in fact, I think in the East, he basically entered into oral tradition in the East, where people old men in Owerri, I think by the time of independence, we'll talk about him, and like the way people will talk about Abacha today, it was that bad. When, for example, a town refused to build a road for him, he had all of the buildings in the towns burned, and then he kidnapped the leaders of that town as hostage, and then sort of like blackmailed the inhabitants of that town to build the road if they wanted their leaders to be released. So they had to. At one point, he knocked out his interpreter unconscious, like knocked him unconscious. Knocked him unconscious because the guy basically, I think he was sort of like in a bit of exchange where maybe your boss says something unfair to you and you say, but I told you, but I did what you said. And he just knocked the guy out, basically. It was so bad that there was actually another white guy, an Anglo-Irish medical officer called James Stewart, who was lynched to death by locals because they thought he was Douglas. He was, I think, strolling through a village with some of his escorts. He got separated by them. This happened in Onitsha, Amairi, close to Mbaise. So, Douglas's, reputation had sort of like stained the reputation of other white people also. So when James Stewart got separated from his security escort, he was lynched by locals who thought he was actually Douglas. In Agbo, in Delta State, that's on the western side of the River Niger, you had another guy called Oswald Crew Reed. The colonial office, of course, writes about him being so effective. By the time he got there, I think within a month, he had built all of the roads required, the buildings required, and everything. But of course, he made use of forced labor, right? And this is very common to most of the colonists and their activities. There's the reliance on free labor that's even encouraged by the governors of the northern and southern protectorates and so on. So Oswald Reed, made use of these types of forced labor, which got him into disputing in a town called Owa with a leading chief called Ekuti. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing the names correctly. The dispute with Ekuti, had him, hunting for Ekuti until actually the supporters of this powerful chief got him killed. That's got Oswald Reed killed. And, when Crew Reed died, actually, Churchill wrote about him and really just blamed the guy's approach to doing things. So Churchill was actually quite critical to the nature with which they, communicated with locals and so on. So, the author also notes that very often people were forced or compelled to work against their own community. They could ask you to demolish some shrine or some house so that they can make way for a road or a railway or something. And then finally, the author talks about the racism. There was a racist thing too, and that's, when looking at the reason why they were so violent. Again, what we need to look at is like literally what Nigerian soldiers do today, where you maybe offend a soldier and next thing he brings out his whip and wants to whip you, starts telling you to do push-ups. That's literally what white people were doing during colonialism. Guys like Major Arthur Glyn Leonard used to call the locals in Igbo land, he called them black monkey brands. At the same time, he found Igbo women very, very attractive. In 1905, another Lieutenant Blackist in Houston beat a young boy to death. So these dehumanizing treatments can easily really just be attributed to racism. That's the tendency to dehumanize. And then, colonies also, which for me is a very weird angle. And again, and this is why I said this Frank Hives guide. Remember earlier when we were reading this book, there was a chapter on, I think it was a chapter before Ekumeku, where the author talked about the account of one Frank Hives saying that he saw some weird creature or something. So anyway, this same Frank Hives apparently used to make, he knew magic, he knew sleight of hand tricks, and he used to use those sleight of hand tricks to try to convince people, that's the people around him, that he had supernatural power, right? So according to the author, some colonists sort of would try to associate themselves with the spiritual in order to get the people they were colonizing to do things for them. Then, finally, the point the author touches on is impersonation of colonialists by Black people themselves. So you may find one Nigerian fraudster, right, who would just go to he or she would wear Western clothing and then go to some remote village, pretend like he works for the British, and then ask them to do this, do that for him. Yeah. So, those crimes according to Max Siollun, such crimes of impersonation may be considered the ancestors of Nigeria's 419 fraud scams. Again, I don't like it when Max Siollun draws these conclusions without in-depth analysis, but okay. Anyway, that's the end of the chapter. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Bishop. If you have any comment on this particular chapter, please flash your mic. P. Femi. All right. So P and Femi, please hold that thought. Let Ubuntu do a synopsis of the mistake of 1914, and then we can take all the comments together. Ubuntu, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Clarissa. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so the mistake of 1914, this is chapter 21. So the author starts by posing a question or making a sort of assertion as to the fact that this question as to why Nigeria was brought together or why Nigeria was created as a country by the Britain, that he says that it's the most contentious of issues between Nigerians. He says that if Nigeria looks deeper, they will realize that they'll be disappointed to find that there was actually no meaningful reason for the creation of the country called Nigeria. Personally, I don't agree. I think that everybody agrees to the fact that there was no reason, there was no logical reason as to why the country was created. But anyways, that's that. He talks about how for 14 years you had two different countries. That's the Northern and the Southern Protectorate. They operated as two different countries with different legal system, different educational policies, different systems of governance, different laws, different colonial policies and all of that, right? And he said something that I find very important. He said that the amalgamation of Nigeria was not sudden. It was a process that had been put in place as far back as 16 years before it happened, based on the recommendation of the Niger Committee, even though Lord Lugard is credited for being the architect of the amalgamation, right? And he was part of the people for 10 years before, or at least 10 years before the amalgamation happened. He was part of the people that advocated for it, but it wasn't something that happened. It was a long process that took at least 16 years before the eventual amalgamation of Nigeria. So he now goes on to say that even the British, right, they actually even admitted that the people of the North and the people of the South, they were completely different people. And he draws an analogy from Goldie, Goldie was part of the people that obviously amalgamated that obviously advocated for the amalgamation of Nigeria. But even he admitted that the two regions, they were extremely different people. They had different government customs, general ideas about life in this world and even in the next, right? But then he now then poses a question to say that if the British themselves, they are aware about these sharp differences between the two Nigerias at the time, why then did they decide to amalgamate the two countries anyway? And then he immediately proceeds to answer the same question by himself to say that just as Britain's entry into Nigeria was motivated by economic reasons, so was the amalgamation of the two countries into one. And then he explains the fact that the Southern Protectorate at the time was economically buoyant, right? So even after the cost of administration, they still had surplusage. Even after the monies that they used to run the country, there was still a lot of surplusage in the South. You couldn't say the same for the North. The North was running in constant deficit. And so they always had to run to the Home Office in England to subsidize for the cost of running the country. And for this reason, the idea to amalgamate the countries were muted at the time. And then you also explained the fact that one of the reasons why the Northern Protectorate at the time was not financially or economically buoyant was because they had no coastline and they were landlocked. And even though Lugard, who was the commissioner at the time for the Northern Nigeria, even though he tried to impose taxes on goods that were imported from the south to the north, this was still not enough to govern the country. And so the amalgamation of the two countries was inevitable at the time. Well, he then obviously reiterates the fact that Lord Lugard, even 10 years before the amalgamation, he had been advocating for the amalgamation of the countries for two reasons. Number one, so that he cures the problem of him always having to run to the Home Office for them to subsidize for the running of the country. Secondly, there was a potential promotion that comes with it because he stood to be the governor of the amalgamated Nigeria. Then he also makes reference to the fact that before let me just say something. So he sort of takes a jab at the people of the South and say, before the people of the South, they start gloating about the fact that the Northern and the Southern Protectorates were amalgamated because the Southern Nigeria was more buoyant. He said that this is not a credit that the people of the South can take, because just as the way the Northern Nigeria at the time didn't have a say in the matter, so did the people of the South. And if the Northern Nigeria at the time had a choice, they also would have advocated against the amalgamation of the countries, because they also accepted the fact that these people were completely different from us, right? So he says that the people of the South should just calm down, right? It wasn't an idea that came from you. You guys had nothing to do with it. It was just for the British, for their own selfish and economic reasons, right? Now, he talks about the fact that Lord Harcourt at the time, in a dinner in 1913, had referred to Southern Nigeria as Lady of Means. This was just in a casual dinner, and he was talking about how it was a union between the people of the North and the Southern Lady of Means, and he sort of prayed for the union, and he says that the union be fruitful and the couple constant. Then he derails a bit and just talks about Lord Harcourt, who was a pedophile at the time, right? But then he didn't say this, but I mean, I think I read from Daily Ogun that he had done some favors for Lord Lugard at some point. And so in 1913, Lugard named the southeastern Nigerian city of Port Harcourt after Lord Lugard. And so that's why you have Port Harcourt now. So that's just an aside. Just talks about the fact that a city that was named, or that is called Port Harcourt as of today, is named after a pedophile at the time, or was named after a pedophile at the time. Yeah. this guy, Sir Harcourt, eventually killed himself. He was found dead because he took overdose of drugs, because I think some of the kids that he had molested told people that he was molesting them, and so he killed himself. But that was just an aside in the book. Now, the author now also talks about the fact that the most extraordinary aspect of Nigeria's amalgamation was the fact that the British didn't think about the long-term consequence of it. The architects of the 1914 amalgamation, including Lord Lugard, and the Niger Committee's report of 1918, that would include your Goldie. There was no guiding vision or objective, right? They didn't contemplate the northern and southern differences, and the fact that even the way they had governed the two protectorates actually even amplified the pre-existing differences between these two regions. I think Funsho and P did a good job about explaining the fact that the two regions were the method or the methodology in which these two regions were colonized were actually different. So those things actually even amplified our differences, but yet they still brought us together without thinking about the long-term consequences of their action. Now, the author now talks about the fact that in 1898, the Niger Committee, who had recommended the amalgamation, also had recommended dividing the southern region into the eastern and the western regions, but he doesn't say why. The author doesn't tell us why this division of the southern protectorate was necessary, but then he also tells us that no such recommendation was made for the north. And so in 1939, obviously after the amalgamation, the southern protectorate was divided, so that's why you have the southeast and the southwest, but the north, like I said, remained the same. And as a result of this, the northern Nigeria has ended up being twice as creating a country where
that is in landmass, right?
Yes, but even in population,
that is if we are to believe the census figure.
At the time, because now if you divide, we don't know what the population was at the time, but really if you divide the two regions, the bigger part would definitely have more people.
Not if you take into consideration things like
marriage of 4 wives. You know, there were more Islamic laws at the time.
Yes, but also if you take into consideration the fact that not every area of that region may have had settlers. 1, 2, if you take into consideration that it's closer to the desert, we all know that populations that moving away from the sea towards the desert, populations decrease. 3, if you take into consideration mortality rates as a result of things like hunger, poverty, illiteracy, and things like that, then it's something that you can.
You know, it's funny that you say this, because even the author himself said so, that when you create a country where one region is geographically larger and has more people, creates contention between people. And up to today, we're still having that contention. That's probably part of what you are saying now, because a lot of the things that we are saying, we are all just speculating. But even as of today that you and I are speaking, right, this sort of situation where you have made one group larger and divided another group is still causing problems in the country, right? But let me just go on. So he now talks about the fact that, okay, I think this book must have been written last year, because he says more than 106 years. So let's say more than and the country continues to grapple with how to deal with the divisions between the north and the south and the mutual each other. I don't think there's debate. It's just, yes, like we say, we're two different people. The author has also said the British also accept that we're two different people, and it's still creating problems up to now, because now we always have to sort of we have to advocate for things, or even our elections. Everything we do is usually along our ethnic or our regional lines, even as of today. And he uses several examples. He talks about the military coup of 1966, the Civil War of 1967 to 1917, the annulment of the presidential elections, the ensuing political crisis that generated after the annulment of the elections, the Sharia crisis, the Sharia law crisis in the early 2000s, which even up till now we still have. So basically, what he's just saying is that even as at then and even up till now, right, we've always been our existence has always been, we've never been unified as a people, right? A lot of the things we do, there's sort of this paranoia between the two regions. So he also, now he says something that I want to read, and I think is actually very important. He said that it's difficult to build patriotism and emotional loyalty to a country created by a foreign invader and inhabited by people whose prior loyalties had never extended beyond their family, village, or kingdom. So it's like, you can't force me to be loyal to people that, you just foisted on me. I don't even know who these people are, but yeah, moving on swiftly. Then he goes on to talk about, okay, even if at the time, for administrative convenience, the British thought that, okay, amalgamating Nigeria would have been a good option, why has it not been reversed? Or even why didn't the British reverse it at the time? Because I'm sure after they brought the people, the regions together, they would have seen for themselves that this union cannot work between these two people. So he poses the question, but he doesn't answer it. But he says something that I find interesting. He talks about how, or gives some credit to Nigeria as to the fact that Nigeria has developed its own homegrown innovations to reduce the tension between the North and the South, such as the affirmative quota system and the alteration of the presidency between the Northern and the Southern regions. I want to disagree with that, because even the quota system is part of the things that cause controversy in the country, with some people feeling they are marginalized. Some people feel like the quota system is being unfairly, or you're using, number one, you're using data that we cannot verify. Number two, you're not being fair, you're not being sincere in the sharing formula. Then talking about the zoning of the presidency between the North and the South, there's no law that says that the presidency must be rotated between the North and South. What you have generally is a gentleman agreement between the key what's it called, the key, what do you call them, political parties, right? So in their constitution, that's the APC and the PDP constitution, you both have something like that, but it's not enforceable, because really it's their constitution. And especially now, since there's so much ethnic tension and the country is really divided, right? If they choose not to give you support, or if they choose not to abide by the gentleman agreement that they usually have, there's absolutely nothing you can do to it. So I'm just saying that him giving some credit to Nigeria, that Nigeria has found ways to be able to sort of reduce the tension between the North and the South, I don't agree. I think that the country, especially in this administration, actually is very, very divided, and it's like you're sort of trying to force us to be together. Anyway, so in conclusion, the author talks about the fact that he again states the fact that the priority of the colonial office the amalgamation was as a result of the goal of the British at the time to minimize the financial burden to the British taxpayer and to maximize revenue. Because obviously it's also, and I think I should have mentioned that at the beginning, because they were having to duplicate officials and govern two different countries that were within the same area. So it made more sense to collapse the governing body into one, because it was cheaper for them. This is aside the fact that, like I said, one region was not as financially buoyant as the other. So he obviously says that the British succeeded, and he now puts it in our face that Nigeria was just a page in a colonial accounting ledger, nothing more. That's about it for that chapter.
Ubuntu, star girl. Thank you for that synopsis. I think Ubuntu has to run very quickly. So if anyone has any questions, comments, contributions for that particular chapter, please go ahead and do so now.
Ubuntu, like, lovely reading, right? And it's really good because this chapter is my favorite in the entire book. And most people don't know, but the title of the chapter, The Mistake of 1914, was actually the title of a speech delivered by Ahmadu Bello in 1952 in Nigerian parliament at the time. And he basically uttered that statement, The Mistake of 1914, in response to the push by the Southern members of parliament for independence from the British at the time. So Ahmadu Bello was Southerner of Sokoto and the Premier of the North, right? He was a direct descendant of Usman Dan Fodio. And at the time, the political position of the North was that they wanted to remain under the British colonial, system. They didn't want any form of independence. But the Southerners at the time, they were tired of British rule and they wanted Nigeria to become an independent state. And so while they were having a debate in the parliament, Ahmadu Bello delivered a speech with the title, The Mistake of 1914. And he simply said, the mistake of 1914 has come to light, and this is why we should never have been united in the first place. And it's funny because, anyway, one of the things that I actually would like to point out is that the mistake was that in the first place, the British should never have gone to declare or to claim the Northern Protectorate. It was simply a move to protect their interests down south. They had no meaningful reason whatsoever to take the North. There was no economic benefits. There was simply nothing. They were merely concerned that they could not abandon such vast, region and land to potential capture by their fellow colonialists at the time, especially the French, because the French had taken Chad, which was very, very close. I mean, if you look at even today's map, you'd see how close Chad is to, they're taking Chad, they're taking Cameroon. These are like knocking on the borders of northern Nigeria. And so they wanted to protect their interests down south. And that was the only reason why they simply went to take the North. So when they took the North, they now had the problem to say, how do we administer this region, that we have taken? And so because the North could not fund itself, right? It was not self-sufficient. They had no commercial advantage compared to the South. They basically were funding it with support from the Treasury in England. And so at some point they got tired to say, this is costing us too much money. We have to find a way to, offset this cost. And so Lugard, following the templates that George Goldie of the Royal Niger Company had laid, simply got the idea that, look, the best way is to just unite these two people together. I'm going to use funds from the South to simply subsidize the expenses of administering the North. And, so Nigeria was created just to balance the accounting books of the colonialists. And this, again,
and because Goldie wanted a promotion.
Yeah, Lugard actually wanted a promotion because Lugard, he knew... Yeah, because he knew that by merging the two, he becomes the governor of the two regions altogether. And one important point also was that Lugard also saw that the people who basically were, Sir Willock, who was basically the Governor General of Southern Nigeria at the time, was making so much money because the British office in London had a position towards colonies. So long you're able to run your colonies, you could make it self-sufficient. If you had a balance, you could keep the remainder. So if you could make money to run yourself, they didn't care. Just, you could keep whatever it is you're making to yourself. And so Lugard was really jealous. He wanted all of that, trappings of power and also commercial benefits to himself.
Just to add to what you're saying, and also if you are also self-sufficient, then they don't interfere with how you govern the people. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
Basically your business, what you do with the people.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I think all of this just foregrounds the point that there is really nothing special about the creation of Nigeria, right? And this is why it's always a problem to define the Nigerian identity. Because again, as Siollun rightly pointed out in the book, it's hard to build any sense of emotional attachment or patriotism to a colonial creation, something that was created without any care whatsoever for social context, relations, or whatsoever, even the slightest of consent amongst the people. And I don't think that we have done the work after, independence to basically build and forge a new identity. What we have done is to continue to sustain the union with brute force and violence. And you could see, for instance, with the fact that even today, we basically talk about the civil war in hushed tones. We don't discuss it. It's forbidden in public media to discuss the events of the civil war because the government is afraid of the kind of things that would come out from basically unpacking and talking about that crucial part in Nigeria's socio-political history. So we've not had the conversation. We've not done any serious work towards actual nation building. We're just trying to keep the union together by all means with brute force and violence. So I'm neither here nor there regarding the conversation around Nigeria, but it's just to point out the fact that people can have these conversations, right? There is nothing special about Nigeria. It wasn't a divinely ordained creation. It was just a bunch of white people trying to balance their books and just developing any kind of system that they felt would work for their own administrative competence. So people should be allowed to talk about Nigeria's creation without anybody making it seem as if it's something special or divinely ordained or whatsoever. It really isn't, and you only have to study the history of Nigeria's formation to understand this.
So, P, the next question is why, even the author asked that question, why has it not been reversed? Or why has nothing been done to sort of, even if it's just to change the name, like why have from 1914, we're in 2021, why has nothing been done about this? That's the $1 million question.
I think there was a guy that went to the National Assembly to change the name of the country to UAR.
and see, before you answer the question, this is exactly the question Malcolm X asked my dad in 1965 when he was here in London giving a lecture. My dad was a student at the LSE, and then he spoke to Malcolm after the lecture. And he asked him the exact same question: why haven't you N's changed the name of your country? It just rings in my head every time I remember my dad telling me this. It's so relevant. Why is it not changed? And I know the difficulty.
I think that most pre-colonial states had not even coalesced enough to become full countries by the time colonization happened, and then colonization also interrupted that natural order. For example, most of the Southeast was obviously going to become an Igbo majority region. I feel personally that without colonialism, Biafra probably would have been a thing. But then we may never know. But the reason why I think people were not so quick to change the name and so on is, first of all, most people had become dependent on that arrangement. Also, nations are born out of, that natural intercultural communication, whether it's violent or not from some major external influence the way the British did. So because of that, if we're saying that the first form of general Yoruba consciousness is traced to the Egbe Omo Odua, which was like as late as in the 1930s. So are we going to say that in the space of 30 years, they would have been able to declare an Odua Republic, for example? It's just not possible. They themselves had not coalesced into a single political nation to do that in the first place, and that severely weakened the resolve to undo what the British did. Essentially, Nigeria is here because it serves everybody's purpose to exist. Yeah.
Can I comment? So the claim you're making is quite interesting, because if you actually look at the political activism of the 50s, especially, leading towards the years of independence and immediately after, you would see that it's actually people from the South that insisted that even if we're going to preserve the Union, in the sense that we're all the same politically administrative units, right, there should be accommodation of the fact that there are different components of this united country, right? So you would hear Awolowo, for instance, say things like,
there is no Nigerian in the same sense you have Germans or English people, right? Because the Nigerian, you know, it was, I will always say things like Nigeria is just a mere geographical expression, right? And that was somebody who understood all of the historical nuances that went into the creation of Nigeria. So it was people from the South mostly, who basically insisted on the fact that Nigeria's governance structure should mirror the fact that, you know, we're uniquely different people, and so we should be able to lead our lives in a way that reflect our values and cultural systems, particularly those that are unique to us, right? So even if you're going to keep like a centrally governed state, so to say, or like a united country, the center should be weak and should be there for mere supervision and just for administrative purposes. The real governance and leadership should take place in the regions, right? And to also be fair to Ahmadu Bello, who was also the premier of the North at the time, he also wanted for the North to be able to keep doing its thing. The only difference is that Ahmadu Bello essentially extended his rule over non-willing members of the so-called Northern region at the time, which was, of course, again, a legacy of British invasion, because we read about how the British united even unwilling participants under the superstructure of the caliphate, because it was easier for them to administer, you know, a single region than to deal with all of these groups, you know, in their factions, right? So that's the difference you'd see. But largely speaking, there was a push for the country to mirror its unique makeup and differences, but they were ignored because, I don't know, the British were quite invested in the project Nigeria, and they wanted what they had designed to remain.
Can I comment? I think my opinion on this is, yes, I think Nigerians lack the courage and the intellectual dexterity to see beyond what they were given. And so we are saddled with, and it's almost the same thing with religion and the other things where, you know, we are content with what we've received, and we are ready to die for it. You know, I mean, we have Nigerians who are more Islamic than they are Nigerian. They are more Christian than they are Nigerian. Neither Islam nor Christianity was founded in Nigeria, but we can swallow things, and we love swallowing things and digesting them and pretending like we own them. So we swallowed Islam and we swallowed Christianity, and we pretend like we're more Christian than the people who found it. And so the same way we swallowed Nigeria, and we refuse to think, or we refuse to see, even when it is not working, even when it doesn't add up, and even when it would be better off even if we went back to the pre-1914 situation. But it's too difficult. It is too mentally challenging. We cannot dream that dream. We cannot see that vision. And if you cannot dream the dream, then you cannot do the work that it takes to achieve the vision in the dream. And we are just incapable of doing that. And we have people who tag along the emotional thing. Oh, my friend is from this part. I have relations, as if you don't have Nigerians who have relations in Ghana and Ivory Coast and all other parts. And oh, we are big, the giant of Africa. Forget that. There's nothing giant about Nigeria. It is a conundrum of failure. But we still carry these ideas that we are big for nothing. But, you know, we love it. And so we are incapable of doing the mental gymnastics. And if you cannot do it and you cannot dream it, then you cannot achieve it. And then the writer's suggestion that, oh, why don't we just change our name? I mean, it's looking at the form rather than the substance.
No, you didn't say if you change our name. I didn't say that. I asked the question. What the author says is that even if at the time, hold on. What the author says is if at the time it was the British amalgamated Nigeria for administrative convenience, after they had done it, they would have seen that it was not this union could not have worked. How come nothing has been done to reverse or reconfigure it? He didn't say we should change the name. I just asked that question. That at the very least, why can't we do something?
So, okay, fine. Let's take your question. Because at the very least, let's say for argument's sake, at the very least, so Upper Volta changed its name to Burkina Faso. How has that resolved the fundamental poverty problems and the issues that still plague the country? So, I mean, yes, it would be easy. I mean, you would think that even that, as easy as it was, would be an achievable thing, right? But it's not likely because we can't dream that dream. You know, and if we can't dream that dream, you can't make it happen. So it's rather unfortunate that we are where we are. But until we are able to find the courage of our conviction and be able to be honest with ourselves and look at the figures, that if revenue continues to be divided based on population and land mass, there are people in certain regions of that country that are doomed to eternal servitude. And there are others that are blessed to continue to consume what they have not owned or what they have not produced, as long as that country remains as it is. And for those who say we will negotiate our way out, we will restructure, it's rather unfortunate that you want somebody to commit suicide, because there are people who are benefiting, will never restructure. There is no amount of talking that will restructure, because that is giving up their privileges and the food that Nigeria as a country continues to give them, even though they don't generate it internally. Thank you.
Acidics, I have a question for you, right? So what do you think is the right approach? Because again, when you say that the people have swallowed the idea of Nigeria, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, right? So an easy way to tell is to see how much popularity that the secessionists, for instance, have garnered in the country. You could see that there's an underlying tension that always surfaces anytime there's someone who can, champion the narrative, especially in the mainstream press, right? So whether it's in the southeast or the south, or even the southwest, right? People who are basically criticize the Nigerian structure and the arrangement often automatically get a lot of followership, because they basically are, people feel like they're expressing their frustrations, right? And then again, so the southeastern people stood up to Nigeria in terms of its structure and everything. And what they got in return was devastation and death. Millions of them died. Their region was completely destroyed. And the entire world looked away as this was happening at the time, because again, it's in the interest of the British. And of course, that the US merely adopts Britain's foreign policy when it comes to Africa, right? So whatever is the British foreign policy when, in Africa, that's essentially the US positions as well. So the entire world merely just looked away as we were pummeled and killed for essentially insisting on our agreements that both parties had signed to, right? So what would you say is the right approach now for the people who are saying, we're tired of this arrangement? So, where do they go from here?
Well,
hold on, guys. I think Femi has been sort of flashing for a while. I don't know if there's anybody else who has wanted to say something. AZ, you haven't given your full submission, but Femi, you go, then AZ goes next.
Yeah, hold on. I'd like to answer the question, then Femi can go.
Well, sorry. Before I want people to also put this in context. Nobody has said anything about the fact that the whole city was named after a pedophile. People are
I mean, a lot of them were pedophiles. If you consider what they did in northern Nigeria, if they were accepting women as bribes, they were not looking at the age of some of these girls, then these guys were not. I mean, that's barbaric. That's like medieval type of mentality. Again, and this is supposed to be in the era of so-called European Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution and whatnot. Come on. We should never ever look at colonialism in the light of, it was a favor to Africans in any way. The people that came were just as barbaric and, stupid as our ancestors were.
Did you say ancestors were stupid?
Well, I mean, is it not obvious?
Uh-oh.
I disagree.
I'm sure.
Me too, I disagree. Funsho is looking for Funsho, be careful yourself.
Acidics, please go ahead. You still have to.
So if he doesn't want to answer, I can answer. P.
Okay, it's fine.
No, I can answer. You're wanting to know what the roadmap is, right?
Yes. What should the people do to demonstrate the courage that you've asked them to summon?
Well, the thing about it is this, that first things first is that there needs to be a recognition, particularly with the folks in the South, that this arrangement only favors one region.
I think that reckoning has already taken place.
It has not. It has not. I mean,
think so?
I am from the South, and I know there are swathes of people in the South that love the arrangement of Nigeria as it is, because it offers some kind of political power balance, particularly in the region. And there's some people also in that region that are afraid of some other groups in that region for whatever reason. So it might appear in certain rooms on this app that it's a uniformed or it's a universally accepted or agreed thing. But actually, when you begin to talk to people, and there are people I speak to, and to even get them to understand the problem, that look, the constitution we have, the way it shares this money, some regions are doomed to eternal servitude. You will be slaves, your children and your grandchildren will be slaves based on that constitution. Because the money will always leave your region and go elsewhere. And that is because it's based on land mass and population. And most people in the South are not going to have 3 wives and 7 kids each. That's 21 children. No. So how is that going to work for you when there are people in other regions who are doing just that? It means that the formula is wrong. And when a formula is wrong, it doesn't matter how assiduously you apply that formula, the result will always be wrong. So, we'll talk about the beautiful restructuring and it will happen, and every now and then they will give you 5% or 3%, and you get some people will dance about it and jump about it. But the bottom line is that somebody's taking the rest, the chunk of it. And it's a different case. We've had this quota system of educational disadvantaged states for God knows how long. Look, if the North were to embrace these unemployed Southerners, the education problem in the North would be resolved. There are enough educated Southern graduates to educate the uneducated people up North. But why? They'd rather go and get contractors from overseas rather than employ the young Southerners who are graduates and looking for work. Why do you think that is? So we're never going to solve that problem because we're not attacking it. But we have the resources. These resources are going abroad. They're going to Canada. They're going to Europe. They're doing their PhDs. They're going everywhere. But we have an illiteracy problem up north. Why aren't they going up north? But the money is going up north. The money is still leaving this same region and going up north. But the money is not being used to employ the graduates that have been educated in this region that could help educate the people up north so that the productivity up north can go up. And then all this banditry and nonsense we're seeing will cease to be a problem. But no. So what is happening up north is a pipeline to banditry. And for the next couple of decades, they have enough people to fill those ranks. And unless you're going to send the army to wipe out the whole region, we are in trouble. because you have so many people not in school. And what do you think, what's going to happen to them? We in the South will go to school, we'll have the education and all that, and you think you live large? People need to eat. And when they look at you, they see some food. Because you're doing well, you have a nice car, you look good. Hey, let's share this thing. And if you're confused about it, listen to Sheikh Gumi, he's telling you, feed our people, we're hungry. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that there's no universal agreement down south that this is a problem. And I have been in so many rooms where even in the southwest, there are people who are wedded to one Nigeria. In the south, people are wedded to one Nigeria. They're key sweights of it. In the southeast, yes, there is a unanimous view that this system is not working. But the southeast, in terms of population and landmass compared to the rest of the country, unfortunately, is small. It's small. So unless the rest of the groups can actually coalesce around the idea and actually start doing something about it, and it's not going to be pretty. There's nobody who wants to eat omelets that will not break the eggs. Everybody who wants it all nice, we all need to be peaceful. Where has that worked? Where has being nice worked? People don't move unless there is some existential threat. Then they begin to sit there and actually negotiate. Otherwise, we're just being nice to each other, and nothing is going to change because we don't want to put the lives on the line. We want peace. And we're going to peace. People are going to the United Nations and this and that. All that is just a dance that will continue to dance and nothing will come out of it. Because in most political crises, the solution is solved on the ground, not at the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Asilix. Thank you very much.
That was deep, Asilix. Thank you.
Yeah, we should probably record this. I think it's Fem's turn to speak now. So.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Femi. Femi, please also, could you make the comments you wanted to make on the other chapter, which was on colonial, was it colonial life?
I think the mistake of 1914 or colonial life, one of those two. It was the chapter.
Yeah, he had some comments on colonial life as well. So, yeah.
Well, actually, my comments have to do with the synopsis that have been given by different people so far. Thank you for bringing me up to your stage and allowing me to speak. I just firstly want to say that what you, ladies and gentlemen, are doing here is very commendable because you're educating Nigerians, especially the new younger generation Nigerians, about the roots and the history of their country. And what is the benefit of history in any situation, in any context? History can be for the sake of having knowledge, but much more effectively or importantly, history can be for the benefit of knowing the roots of problems, knowing where you are, and knowing how to move forward. And I believe that's probably your ultimate aim in this room, to be able to educate Nigerians so that they can understand the roots of our problems and our situations in that geographical expression, and then ultimately be armed with the knowledge that's relevant to get solutions. As to what different synopses have been given, I remember something that Ubuntu said, that one of the excuses given by the Lugard brigade that the North was economically not viable. I think there have been different rooms in this clubhouse that have dealt a lot with the history of the northern parts of Nigeria. And the fact that that region itself was very viable pre the entrance of the Fulani Othman Danfodio raiders. We knew that before them, the Hausas, the Kanuris had been involved in a very, very prosperous trading activities with across the Sahara. But when the folks from the Futa, whatever they're called, they came from, entered the space of Nigeria. Yeah. We've heard a lot about that in Clubhouse. Then, of course, things changed. So the Hausas were subjugated, eventually also the Kanuris, and all the trade that these people were known for was changed. And the whole part of that country became basically a massive slave colony where people were just treated as slaves, and the religion of Islam was imposed. And we also know that this religion had been present in this region before the entrance of these people into that region. So the northern Nigeria necessarily should not have been economically unviable if it wasn't, you can argue, for the invasion and the incursion of the Fulanese into the space. And I also wanted to bring something into the discussion. It's the fact that there's a news that I live in the United Kingdom, where today that Barbados as a country has chosen to separate itself from the Queen of England. And so I think from tomorrow they will cease to have the Queen as their sovereign in that country. And it's to let you know, I think it was AZ that said it, that the lack of contrition by the British for the evils and all the things that went on in those times is interesting. I mean, the British are the most interesting people in the world you can find. They're the ones that will do the worst of things, but you'll still find it difficult to blame them for it, because they have a way of being very civil, about how, they talk about things they do, or just sort of like evade responsibility for what they do. So, for example, ships will sail from the south coast of England to the southwest, to the western part of Africa, and East Africa and all those parts of Africa, collect slaves, move them, ship them to North America, and to the British people, their hands are clean. And then eventually, the proceeds of those trades come back to Britain. So that triangle is formed. The proceeds of that trade now comes back again to Britain. In sugarcane and all the other wealth that's generated from the enslavement of those people. But today, everybody talks about America. Oh, it's America that's bad and all that. But nobody seems to realize that this problem was caused originally by the British. And they also know how to point their fingers at the Americans when it's appropriate to say that, yes, you guys have a big problem in your society. And that aside, I believe that, and I also want to mention something that I heard. This was Femi Falana talking about the legacies of the colonialism, because I believe that we're understanding this history so that we can understand where we are today, why we're here, where we are today. So it was said by Femi Falana. Femi Falana is a very well-known activist and lawyer in Nigeria. And he was speaking, when he was reacting to the NSAS report. And he said, the Nigerian police force that was given to us by the British, because, think about the word force. It was created as an instrument to subvert the people, to make the people to fall in line, and to use force as a means of that, of achieving that. I mean, you could never, ever hear the word force used in Britain as, to describe their police systems here. It's not possible, because they know that the relationship between the police and the people should not be one where they use force to subjugate the people. But that legacy that was passed on when he created the police force is what we still have till today in Nigeria. And that is those are some of the things that we should start to be, we should be fundamentally asking ourselves that these things are not right. These things should be changed. And there's so much I would have loved to speak about. When Acidix was saying that this change, to restructure, for me, is more of self-determination in Nigeria, cannot be achieved by peaceful means. Well, you could say so, but you see, the most important thing, and one of the things that I find is my main aim for, hanging around in clubhouses, if there can be unity enough within the peoples that make up that country called Nigeria, it would be difficult for the core north to look at the rest of the country and say to them, you're not going to self-determine. But the fact that there's no unity, like he said, and I think P also said, is the problem. And I think we've not reached that critical mass where the North people are speaking this language that, look, we do not want to exist in this structure anymore. But you see, again, I will say this, well done to you guys, because you're enlightening Nigerians to understand that the problems of Nigeria go beyond go and collect your, PVC and votes, or go and, elect leaders that will represent you in the parliament to help you, achieve your self-determination. It goes deeper than that. Because as has been said, the northern region was kept together, but southern protectorates were divided. And it was even further divided by creating the Midwest out of the West, before the 66 coup. So we have a situation where it was conveniently made for the indirect rule of Nigeria, which you have beautifully, elucidated for us that this indirect rule is what worked in the north, and is what eventually Lugard wanted to use in this, for the whole country. It was difficult, but eventually when they created the Nigerian state, they reintroduced it. And I also want to say that, to say that the British will, I think today there's a bit of an advantage that we have, because just the same way Afghanistan became a host for the Taliban, that was the Taliban in Afghanistan became a host for the Osama bin Laden that attacked America. More and more, the British are realizing, I believe, and the Americans also, that these Fulanis, by virtue of the Boko Haram and the ISWAP and other things that are invading Nigeria, they are realizing that are these people really the kind of allies they want to continue to hold on to? Because ultimately they know that eventually some of those terrorists, like the Abdul Mutalabs of this world, will make their way to their countries. So I think there is an opportunity for Nigeria to get our acts, for the peoples in Nigeria, I won't say Nigeria, to get our acts together and try to get something good. Because I don't believe that the British are still as wedded out to the allegiance, to the alliance with the people that they used to, indirectly rule Nigeria as they were before, because they themselves realize, and I repeat this, that these people are not necessarily people that, they should continue to associate with. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Femi. P, I think you had one comment on the colonial life chapter as well.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the point Funsho made on the fact that racism motivated a lot of the actions that the colonialists did. And it's absolutely correct, right? If you look at, it's what even led to slavery was not unique to white people, as some people would stress, but the fact that theirs was uniquely inhumane stemmed from racism, because they did not even think of the people that they were enslaving. And the same way the colonialists did not also conceive of the people that had come to govern as equals or as human beings of any sort at all. They saw them as subhuman beings who were, who were vile and savagery, and so were basically deserving of any kind of violence.
They look like monkeys. Can't you remember when we're reading? There was a chapter we're reading, and we're reading somebody's journal, and they said we look like monkeys. Yeah.
They did not even think of us as human beings, worthy of any kind of dignity or respect or anything of the sort whatsoever. It was just merely to repress, to brutalize, and so there was nothing outside of they didn't consider anything an exception in terms of violence and the enforcement of their brutal policies. So it's also very important to conceive of the colonialist actions in that regard. They didn't care for the people, so it wasn't really about the well-being or the welfare of the people. It was about perfecting their exploitation and their extraction agenda. So whatever positive stemmed from that was merely coincidental, right? It was not an intended aim or objective. They were very focused on what they wanted, and was to exploit and to extract resources and to basically just create, conduit pipe to feed development back home. So that was their main singular objective, and they enforced it with a special brutality. And Lord Lugard was quite prominent in this regard. Lugard was an animal, right? There is really no other way to describe him. He was a complete animal, right? It was the same guy after they had defeated
I think it was Atahiru the Sultan of the Caliphate at the time, after they had killed the guy and butchered his army when they stood and fought in Bormi. He basically was admiring the bangle on the guy's leg, and to retrieve the anklets, he simply chopped the guy's leg off, just to retrieve the anklets. Interestingly, when he got to him, he saw that the anklet was not of the quality he wanted, and so he discarded it. That's the kind of barbarity that they were committing at the time, and they considered it to be normal. I mean, there's a picture that Azuwike used to use as PTR, and he used to haunt all of us with that image.
I just put it up, Pete. Just PTR. Everybody can see Lugard.
Yeah, and it's said to be Lugard, surrounded by the severed heads of the natives, right?
Once again, I would like to say I'm not sure that's Lugard.
Whoever it is, I'm sure it's a British colonial officer, whoever the person might be. And so the point remains that they did not think of the natives as human beings, right? So that explains the barbarity and violence. And so it's always important to frame colonial actions in that context, right? So whatever development acts they did was merely, something that was just another step towards achieving their goal. It was not intended for the benefit of the people or for their welfare. And that also fed into the indirect rule system. So you had in the Southeast a selection of warrant chiefs without any kind of systematic or any kind of deliberateness. It was just all with, nonchalance, because the end goal at the end of the day is just to select people that would obey their directives, right? There was no concern for leadership competence or whatsoever, because they didn't care. People could die for all they cared. Just obey us and allow us to take our fines and taxes and resources. Once that goal is met, then you can do as you please. It's not our business, right? So it's always important to frame colonial actions in that context so that we can really understand the extent of the evil that was committed.
Thank you, P. Femi, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you again. Something I forgot to add, which is a response to one of the synopses I was given about Christianity in Nigeria. I think it was Funsho that was saying this, and very well said indeed. So, he was saying that at a point when they see, okay, let me put it this way. I believe that Christianity, by the virtue of the fact that it was tied to the education of the people in the southern part of Nigeria, was ultimately a force for good. The fact that a lot of our traditional religious practices were set aside because of Christianity, people have said a lot about the fact that that has robbed us of our identity, and I certainly do not deny that. But what doesn't help, especially for someone like people like us of our own generation who were born into Christianity almost as the mainstream religion in our country and Islam, is the fact that what doesn't help us to actually be able to sort of connect in a very positive way with the old belief systems in our culture is the fact that, I say this with a lot of caution, and this is not a blanket statement, but you do see that a lot of the practices that are publicized about, that link to our culture, our old religious beliefs, are to do with things like ritual killings. You hear about the, what was that one that happened in the East? I've forgotten. Ezego, and there was a forest where they used to, do a lot of ritual killings of humans, and even in the West, and different parts of the South as well. So you hear a lot about that, and you think, okay, you want me to sort of reconnect with my old beliefs, but will those beliefs, if they had been kept as they were at the time, would they have reformed to the point where they will have put aside some of the things that will not be compatible or consistent with a more modern culture and society as we have right now? Especially when you see that the vestiges of those practices that we're seeing now, some of them, or maybe I don't know whether it's a lot of them or some of them, obviously the ones that get all the publicity are the ones that are negative, that are sort of saying, people committing barbaric things like killing humans for the sake of trying to do rituals. So those questions. I'm not. So what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is that I'm not against those that believe that we should embrace our old traditional religious beliefs and systems. But I also do not think that the advent of Christianity, particularly into the Nigerian space, was necessarily a force for bad. And I say this because, like Funsho was saying, I'm going back to what Funsho was saying now, that there was the class of people that, that were educated by the colonialists, and, they were those that were sort of high up in the society. And I want to believe that that is tied to the way the Western people, the people in the Southwest and the Southeast of Nigeria, of the region called, the country called Nigeria, have valued Western education. I suspect that the fact that those people that were educated seem to fare better in their societies was the reason why people would do everything, even sell land, sell property to educate their children, because they wanted them to have a better life. And I think eventually that augured well for us, and that set us way ahead. Compared to the North, where, you also educated us that the Lugard didn't allow it to, Western education to spread into and Christianity to spread into the North, because they respected the fact that Islam was dominant, and also they also benefited from the fact that they could usually use it as a tool for indirect rule. So that difference created by just those events or accident of history is one of the reasons why we in the southern part of the country feel so far ahead, or we feel like how we would say that the North is a dead weight on the geographical expression called Nigeria, because the South embraced Western education early, and it spread quickly. And the fact that you can link that Christian education to the activities of the missionaries is one of the reasons why I personally do not see of Christianity coming to Nigeria as necessarily a force for bad. So, like I said, I'm not condemning our old belief system. I'm proud of whatever it was that made us who we were, but I don't necessarily believe that Christianity was a bad thing for Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Femi. Any other comments on the synopsis before I begin my reading on the concluding chapter?